what's up, everybody? Patrick Curtis, CEO and founder of Wall Street Oasis here. It's been a long time since I've done a live stream, so figured it had been way too long. Had a lot of great new updates for all of you, so I wanted to kind of hop on here and just spend some time with everybody, offer a Q&A session around anything related to high finance careers, networking, management consulting, you name it, and hopefully provide some value to all of you. So I did have a presentation that I was just going to walk through to try and give this short little impromptu talk a little bit more structure. So I'll pull that up, but then as people kind of start coming in, you can interrupt me, throw in comments anytime you want. And then from there, we will try to make it productive and make it interactive, because I think that makes for a better live. So yeah, let's pull up, maybe Amir, we could just throw up the presentation. I could just start giving a little background for people that aren't aware of what WSO even is. We can go back here. So just, I got this. We're gonna skip all this, my whole background. I kind of want to, I think most of you know my background. I worked in 2 years of investment banking at Rothschild, 4 years in private equity, and went to get my MBA at Wharton, and then basically have been doing Wall Street Oasis ever since. So I'm an old man now at this point. But in terms of what WSO is, our 3 main missions are: number 1, to become the most entertaining and useful finance community in the world. Number 2 is try and bring transparency to all of you to some of these really opaque industries like investment banking and like management consulting. And then most importantly, our 3rd mission, really to help every student professional, no matter their background, to kind of help get through the same opportunities as those with the most privilege. So those are 3 core missions that drive us every day. And in terms of the success we've had, we've placed candidates across all the top investment banks, all the top PE funds, hedge funds, quant funds, all the top, obviously McKinsey, Bain, BCG, all the top those funds. So we've been around for almost 20 years now. Here are some of our students inside WSO Academy that are raving about the outcomes and how it's helped them. But I want to make this session a lot more tactical, ideally, and useful for all of you. So I kind of wanted to just hold on this slide for a little bit and break down like some of the key pillars that we take our own students through inside of our programs to help them break into these really competitive, high finance careers. So I'll stop there. I don't know, Amir, do we have, I can't really see, should we wait a little bit? Should I give more background, or do you think we should go forward on some of this stuff?
I think we give it a few minutes. There are people on LinkedIn who are currently watching. We have 14 people there. If anyone has any questions before we jump into this presentation, feel free to ask Patrick any questions you have in the meanwhile before we go through this presentation.
Yeah, and then if something comes up around this when I'm talking, of course, we want to make it interactive. So just feel free to just post in here any questions about anything, what I'm talking about, or anything kind of that's relevant to your specific situation is fine. So I think in terms of how we break down for our students inside our programs, inside Academy in particular, one of the things we do is we like to kind of separate the 10 pillars into like the first 3 is really more hyper-focused on how to land more interviews. So if you think of just stepping back from a 10,000-foot level, when you think about like landing a job, you could really think about it as sales, because what you're really trying to do is sell your own labor to a company. Now, the bad news is it's really hard to make that sale. The good news is that you only need 1 sale to actually get the job and get an offer and be gainfully employed, and ideally gainfully employed in one of the best careers. So in terms of how we think about if we're approaching this as a sales mission to sell ourselves to a company, the best salespeople in the world, typically what they're doing is several things. Number 1 is they have a very wide top of funnel. So that means they're constantly finding new leads, new opportunities, and communicating with potential prospects. And so if we think of the top of the funnel, we want it to be super, super wide like this. And we'll get to this in a little bit more detail. But in order to land more interviews, you want to make sure that it's not just really wide, but you're actually able to nurture people down that funnel. And so it's not just super wide, but closed off, but we're actually able to open it up a little bit. And that comes from making sure you have a really strong CV, a really strong resume. You have an optimized LinkedIn profile, that it meets all the expectations of what these, high paying, high demand, highly competitive jobs would expect from somebody applying there. The second thing is really around branding and internships. And I see a lot of mistakes from interns and students that are trying to kind of try everything. And a lot of people will tell you, it's college, university, it's your time to experiment everything. And I agree, it is. And you should experiment. You should do different internships across different branches. But when it comes to applying to a specific role, so for example, if you're applying to a growth equity shop, you don't want to have like only banking on there. Ideally, you have something about investing or growth equity on your CV. So the branding is really important, and how you frame your internships is really important for whatever job you're specifically applying to. So you really want to have internships that are directly related to whatever role you eventually want to do. So for example, if you are targeting IB, you want to have skills around valuation work, financial modeling work. And ideally have the right keywords and branding on there, including, DCF, precedent transactions, trading comps, these things that are important for people to know that you have these skills, you've done it before, and you're not afraid of those things. So in terms of just like relationships and widening that top of that funnel, hey, Daniel, basically, we can think of this as, you're going to be ignored, call it 90% of the time. But really, the way you want to be thinking of this is the more people you talk to in the industry you're targeting, the higher likelihood is you'll be getting more first-round interviews. And so you can think of that wide top of funnel. Really, the goal here isn't just to make it transactional, to make it like a one-off, hey, can you give me a referral type of feeling. The goal is to build a long-term relationship. And so this is why pillar number 3 is not called networking, because networking kind of has that stigma of like, hey, I'm just doing this because I need something right now. But it's actually relationships. And so as you think about your networking and building relationships, you should really always try to do this when you need at least. So when you need at least, once you already have the job, once you've already have landed the internship, this is the most powerful time to build relationships, because the communication you have on those calls, suddenly there's no desperation. There's no kind of like implied reason you're trying to talk with them. Either, they feel it or you feel it. And you can really just focus on learning more and understanding what their specific role is, and actually have genuine curiosity. So I think in that sense, relationships and networking is absolutely critical. So on this next slide, I kind of break it down a little bit more, get it more visually in terms of how to actually, improve your odds by up to 10x. And so if we think about like on the left side in red, the red font, the amateur networker who gets, limited interviews. Basically, what ended up happening is this amateur, what they do is they kind of send standardized mass impersonal messages. They have generic interactions when they get on the call. They start networking right before they need a job. They have limited follow-up. So when somebody does reply back, they're either takes them a long time to get back, and they're just sending out random connections. If you move to the middle, the pro, this person's not just sending random connections. Maybe they're sending, connections to alumni groups or, student clubs that people who are part of student clubs that they were part of. They're maybe looking at people that originally came from the same country as them, and they're having consistent follow-ups, stronger connections. They're getting better at developing those kind of personal interactions. And so these people we would call like a professional networker. They're doing a good job. And so we obviously want you to get from the amateur to the pro as soon as possible, so that you're getting a better conversion. And you can see that first little triangle has not only small, but it's closed off. And so you're not going to be getting a lot of interviews from that small little funnel. The pro, you can see it widens a little bit. It not only widens at the top, but it also opens a little bit. So you're going to be getting significantly more interviews if you're a professional, because you are doing the follow-ups. You are getting, better personalized interactions. Now we think to the right, and this is kind of what we do with our students here, is we really try to supercharge this. So we go even wider. We leverage software for scale. So it includes like LinkedIn automation tools, email productivity tools, so that when people are ignoring you, you're not giving up. You actually have like 3 to 4 templates over a period of 4 to 6 months that you're going to be sending them on autopilot, so that excuse me, for sure you're getting as many possible interviews as possible from the top of funnel kind of outreach. And in terms of numbers here, this is not drawn to scale in terms of like 10x, 3x, but in terms of like how you're thinking about this. If you were to say, send out 100 connection requests on LinkedIn, who out there can guess the percentage of people that will connect with you? Anybody have a guess? I don't know if anyone's in the comments that wants to guess this, but any 50% to 5%, 10%. Typically, if you're from a non-target school or like background that's doesn't look very good and your LinkedIn hasn't been polished, you're looking at anywhere on the low end of like 12 to 18%. That's pretty bad. That means typically not alumni, whatnot. But if you're at a super target school or have a polished CV, it's much easier to get that initial connection acceptance. And that typically can range anywhere from, call it 25% to 45%. I've even seen 50+% in some cases. Point being, how open your funnel is really depends on your branding, how good your CV looks, how good your LinkedIn looks, and all those other things. So you really want to try and make this as wide as possible, but also as open as possible so that you're dropping as many first round interviews to there. And so when we talk to our students inside Academy, when they are starting with us, typically late freshman year, early sophomore year, or people who are past recruiting and are kind of in a rush to try and land something, usually a good proxy in terms of the number of conversations you should be having a week is about 3 to 5 every single week. So people who start early enough, or every month that kind of goes by where you haven't started this, is about 20 less people and about 2 to 3 less interviews that you could have. So if you give yourself a full 4 to 6 months, you're looking at 80 to 100 conversations with people who are directly in the industry you're targeting. You can imagine it's pretty common for those people to get double-digit first round interviews, and this for like an on-cycle recruiting or even for off-cycle or graduate programs in the UK. So it's basically universal, but you can think of like those specific metrics for yourself when you're thinking about how wide does the top of my funnel need to be. Probably wider than you think. And a lot of people are like, hey, do I just cold email? My response on cold emails is really bad. One of the things we advise to our students is really leverage LinkedIn, because LinkedIn is going to help the leads self-qualify themselves. Anybody who's connecting with you, now suddenly you have their email and their contact info, and you have a reason to reach out to them to thank them for the connection. So it makes it much easier to actually convert to a phone call with proper follow-up. So let's keep going, and then I'll kind of get to some of these questions. So that's like the interview portion. That's the portion that really matters in terms of getting in the door. Once you get in the door, it doesn't go completely away, but your school, your GPA matters a lot less. School, GPA, all these things really determine kind of the shape of your funnel and how wide or how closed off it is. But once you're in the door and you're in an interview room, for the most part, it's a pretty even playing field. And so the way we think about this in terms of how to convert an interview process to an actual offer is we approach this with these other pillars. So obviously technicals you need to know: accounting, M&A, evaluation, DCF, brain teasers, mental math, especially if you're on the quant side and you need to know more mental math. For consulting, obviously case interview prep. If you're in like hedge fund equity research, you need to have your stock pitch down. Then the 7 stories for the behavioral side is a tool we use where you want to have at least 7 stories with specific themes, where you're showing and not telling somebody that you have a great work ethic, that you're a team player, times you failed and how you kind of bounce back from it. And then from there, practice makes better. We very, very strongly believe that you're never going to be perfect, but you can definitely get better at the interview skill. And the more you actually work on it, the more you do mock interviews, whether it's just with peers, but also ideally with professionals in the industry that can give you detailed feedback, the better you're going to get. And so for our students, we actually have 10 subcategories we grade each student on after every single mock, so that they know, hey, I should really be focusing on my DCF or my valuation, or my authenticity is low on the behavioral side because I've scripted things too much. So it's really important that you get the reps before a real interview. I can't tell you how many times we have students, or we see students that get to like a super day. It's like the most important interview in their lives, and they've mock interviewed like twice. I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. Like literally whether you get this offer or not determines whether you're going to be making like 60, 70K a year with like 5% base increases, or like 110 base with $50,000 to $80,000 bonuses. Like the how high stakes those interviews are is just like, you should be putting in like 10 times more work into this than like even your classwork, assuming your GPA is in good enough shape. But like assuming you can keep your GPA up high, almost all of your effort outside of your classes should be into this thing. This is the thing that's going to actually move the needle on how many offers you get, and if you get an offer at a really competitive firm. The other stuff is on education, so financial modeling, evaluation. Like, could you actually do the job today? I actually think the education piece is one of the least important to get the job. You need to know the technical interview portion, but the education is really important to survive the internship and get the return offer. And we can talk about that if you guys have questions on it. And then the data edge, where are you getting interview insights from? Like, what was asked last recruiting cycle and stuff like that. So we have a massive company database, but you can get this from finance clubs. You can get this at your school. If you have a good finance club, you can get this from upperclassmen, things like that have gone through the process before you, or even in your networking chats. If you're talking to an analyst and they like you a lot, they may be able to kind of give you some tips in terms of what to expect. So, but having data is really helpful. So, hey, I'm interviewing for Houlihan Restructuring. They're going to be asking me these, 6 or 7 questions are the most likely to come up. So that's kind of the key pillars. Academy is a program, and I'll open this up to Q&A in a second, is our 12-week boot camp, along with 2 years of full support with over 1,500 mentors to help students break into careers in high finance and management consulting. In terms of the ideal candidates we're looking for, we like to see people who are super motivated to land one of these careers. They can stick to the program, so they have the time available to stick with it. So typically we ask for 10 hours a week, and they're leaders. They have academic and extracurricular activities. Ideally we like to see students with 3.5 GPA or more. We have admitted students less than that if they're really driven and show like that they've been improving. But those are typically the ideal candidates. And in terms of timing, I do like to see freshmen, ideally, I know freshman year the year just ended, the school year just ended. So if you just finished freshman year now, it'd be a great time. If you're just finished sophomore year, obviously it's late. I don't know what happened with on-cycle recruiting for you, but we'd love to help. But it's much easier if you come to us earlier in either freshman year or right before sophomore year, because I can tell you once classes start back up in the fall, and once November, December rolls around, it kind of is just on you. And by that point, it's very hard to catch up on the networking side, such that you're giving yourself the proper odds. And then in terms of just since you guys are on this, you can just apply directly through this. You can use the QR code. I don't know if it'll work with the comments overlaid, but maybe I can jump to this slide.
I removed the logo.
Yeah, you can read the logo. But point being, we can kind of get to some questions now.
Patrick, let's while people are trickling in and asking questions, let's take a quick 30-second break. Can you check your DMs real quick?
Sure. Okay. Well, and great to hear you got an interview scheduled. Good luck with that. Patrick had a question here. I can show this on here. As a student, do you think we should be purging our resumes of non-relevant work experience? So it depends a little bit on, Patrick, on your like stage and where you are and what you're targeting. But what I'd say is yes, if it's super non-relevant. So for example, I've seen things where people were like servers or busboys or drivers or things that don't really have very little relevance. Now, if you're just a freshman and you've had some summer jobs or stuff like this, and you have nothing else really to fill out that experience section, I don't mind necessarily having that, but you should, as soon as possible, try to get some even if it's off cycle, not summer internships, something related to finance or something related to consulting, if that's what you're targeting. So yes, ideally you're purging and getting rid of the things that are less relevant, and or at the very least kind of reducing their the amount of space you're giving them. Awesome, Huang. Good luck. All right, let's see what we got here. If you're going into uni, what are the technicals I should be learning over summer? You mentioned valuation and financial modeling. Should I try to become good at Excel? So Daniel, I don't think it's to land the job, I don't think it's as important to get good at Excel. There are occasionally some cases where you will have to build a model. So you probably want to have like the basics down. But in terms of like what technicals to study, if you're targeting, are you targeting IB? If you're targeting, it sounds like you're targeting IB based on your question, but I would say you can kind of break down the technicals into about 5 different areas. One is accounting, one is valuation, one is like DCF, which is part of valuation, but valuation meaning like precedent transactions and trading comps and equity value to enterprise value. So you need to know all of those. M&A, if you're going to be going for generalist or M&A roles. And then you want to also think about like the specific niche groups that you'd be interviewing with. So like if you were to interview for like a financial institutions group, it's very different from like a generalist role. Or if you're interviewing for like oil and gas group, that's very different. So we have specific like modules designed for certain groups since they are so different. So like even TMT versus like capital markets versus FIG. I mean, FIG and oil and gas are probably 2 of the most dramatically different ones. But the others are still like, there's enough nuance there where like, you'll probably need to know if you're interviewing with somebody from a specific group, how to speak, how to say why you're interested in that group. And then how to, answer the technicals there. In terms of like how much time you spend, the Excel should be like, call it 10 hours of prep. The technicals, like the actual learning the interview questions and how to respond properly and learning the theory behind it, should probably be closer to 50 to 80 hours of prep in terms of being competitive. So in terms of like weighting, I'd put it much more on like knowing what's going to be coming in terms of the interview questions, and then more specifically how to answer them. And yeah, that's what I would say. Here we have a good question. A lot of programs prefer freshmen or sophomores to apply to their internship leadership programs. What is the best way for rising seniors to break into finance if they just pivoted their major? Good question. So yes, a lot of banks are doing these leadership programs or internships. I put it in quotes because really it's recruiting in disguise of leadership programs. They're basically just trying to get in front of the best candidates earlier in order to try and have an exploding offer in front of them prior to the other banks being able to extend them an offer. And so the banks are kind of leapfrogging each other. We're seeing this with private equity recruiting as well. So like candidates that are joining investment banking there was now on-cycle recruiting before they even started their job. So meaning they're getting recruited. They actually I think a couple of weeks ago, in May, we're getting recruited for a job that starts in June 2027 or July 2027. So over 2 years, about 26 months in advance is when private equity recruiting. And so banks are kind of doing a similar thing in undergrad. And it's why we're seeing on-cycle recruiting creep up earlier and earlier. So to the point where this past year, we had the on-cycle process kick off with RBC opening up in September. And then we had 4 firms opening up in December, which is like unheard of. That RBC typically opens up super early, but like having 4 firms jump into before the new year was pretty new. So I suspect this year is going to be even earlier. And then most still went in January, February. But almost everything was wrapped up by March of sophomore year for junior summers. And this is for US, obviously. For rising seniors to break into finance, if you just pivoted your major, getting back to this question, the best thing you can do is try to get into the full-time recruiting process. So if you're going to be going into your senior year, if you network hard enough from right now, you kind of have to like start right now, but from now until call it late July, early August, you could theoretically, if you had a good CV put together and you have a couple good conversations, and the rest of your profile isn't like weak in other places, you could theoretically get into a full-time recruiting cycle, assuming the macroeconomy cooperates. So what do I mean by that? So usually about 90 to 95% of the full-time offers given to students come from the summer internship class, usually. Some years, like 2 years ago, was very weak because there wasn't a lot of deal flow. And so what ended up happening is the 90% return offer rate dropped all the way to 70%. So that was really bad for everybody because there wasn't even a full-time process. They weren't even taking all their interns. Usually in a stronger market where maybe interest rates get cut or whatnot, or deal flow explodes, what'll end up happening is there'll be a full-time process called usually early August, late July, early August, where there'll be a smaller process. Let's say the bank realizes, hey, we had 100 interns. We're going to offer 85 of them return offers, but we actually want another 10 to come in, and we don't want these other 15 that we're not going to give offers to. So we're going to run a small process with like 50 kids to bring in 15 more interns, because we actually want a full 100 coming into this next year, because we're projecting now a stronger deal environment. So it depends a lot on like what the bank's seeing in terms of deal flow, in terms of their own attrition with their analysts. Yeah, that's why I'd say if you're a rising senior, it's actually not over, but it tends to be like in terms of for high finance, but it's still very hard because you have to get into that smaller process. And in order to do that, like usually you have to have a pretty good network to even know that it's happening. And you need to be, well connected and well networked there. So hopefully that's helpful. So Sean's asking, pivoted later as well, trying to break in full time. Any advice for recruiting this fall from a West Coast non-target? My hopes are to get to a lower middle market bank and lateral from there. Hey, Sean. Yeah, so it depends on what year you are, but like kind of what I just mentioned, I think it's really important that you get yourself out there and connected with as many people, and knowing where you stand competitively. Knowing that you're late is important. Knowing where you stand relative, like GPA, semi-target, non-target, like how many alumni do you have to call on, is important, because then you know like what banks you should be spending most of your time. So the fact that you know your West Coast non-target is good, because you're not going to be spending a lot of your time like chasing like Goldman and Evercore and whatnot. I think you can focus more on like middle markets and lower middle markets to try and get your foot in the door. I think it's a good strategy because with starting late, you are going to need to like focus your efforts so that you can get on enough calls and try to get those first rounds. So yeah, I think what you're doing sounds good, because it sounds like you actually have good introspection in terms of where you sit relative to the competition, and that's critical. So let's see here. Here we go. I don't know what this 15% means. Let's see here. This is actually a good question. One of our students in the academy right now, okay, what is a good line to know in interviews to not explain too much on a question that is asked, but to still be comprehensive? This is actually a really important point that a lot of people get wrong. Also in cold emails, they get wrong. So when somebody asks, like, tell me about yourself or walk me through your resume, which is a very common like intro first question to any sort of interview, I think a lot of students will make the mistake of like going into a long winding story. It'll be like 5 minutes long. I prefer the approach where you're going more high level, hitting highlights and doing 30 seconds to a minute, and then kind of letting them decide specifically what what to dig into and what to kind of where they want to ask more questions. So kind of where you're from, what you've done, what internships you've done, why you're interested in this specific role, and then kind of leave, and then maybe a few, comments on the internships you did and the projects you did at school, and then that's usually enough. So similar to the technicals in terms of like not to explain too much on a question. I think the way you frame like a technical and how much to talk about is you try to answer the question, but framing it in a way that shows you understand the theory behind it. And then you say, as an aside, there's also this, this, and this. I'm not sure. Would you like me to continue on that? And then so you kind of can stop and do a check-in. So once you've spent like 20 seconds answering the question, it's answered correctly. You don't need to go on and try to show off on like all the other technical things. You could just make mention of these other nuances, to make sure they know that you are well aware of how things could change if other kind of factors change. So think of it as like go like 50, answer the question correctly with some context so they know you kind of understand it, but then mention some of the other things that you would talk about further if they wanted you to. All right, here we go. City UK M&A to the moon. Okay. I guess so. Comment from IG. Can I get into high frequency trading? I did a master's degree in computer applications. Yeah, but it depends on, your ability on the quant side, and hard to know with just seeing a random comment if you could get in. Master's degree in computer engineering could be from anywhere. All right, here we go. Let's see what else we got here. Comment from Jarhead. Would it be fair to say that it's practically impossible to break into the field having no connections whatsoever? Oh, this is a great question. No, it would not be fair. It would not be fair to say that. You could come from literally nowhere and do this. I've seen kids from like complete no-name schools. I've seen kids from complete, low GPAs. I've seen everything. And it really comes down to like understanding where you sit relative to other people on that competitive spectrum, and understanding like what other smaller steps you can make to get yourself closer to breaking into like the end goal. So I'll give you an example. Sometimes we're talking to like masters in finance students that are late or career pivoters or whatnot. And oftentimes you're like, I want private equity or I want investment banking. And let's say their GPA is okay, and they go to kind of a non-target MSF. Oftentimes we're talking to them about like strategies around like, well, okay, your goal is here. How do we, if we're not going to be able to directly break into that ultimate goal, how do we get ourselves closer to that channel? How do we get ourselves closer to that ultimate end goal? And typically the way that's done is we'll look for roles that still keep the window open longer for that specific end goal. So for example, you could look at transaction advisory services or valuation shops where you're doing valuation work, where you're doing modeling, where you're doing quality of earnings, or things relevant to the space, such that when the economy picks back up or when your networking gets more broad and you get better at kind of landing interviews from that networking, you're ready and able to kind of convert on that, even if it takes you a year and a half, 2 years of those conversations to make it happen. So if you think about it, like if you can consistently do 20 conversations a month for 2 years, and you do the math on that, that's like a lot of people. That's like 500 one-on-one calls with follow-ups. Like you're going to basically know a ton of people. Like I find it very hard to believe that if you're working on yourself and working on your skills, that you can't, meaning not just like skills on interviews and networking, but also skills on like financial modeling, and you're showing that you're doing other projects to keep yourself sharp. I find it very hard to believe that you won't be able to get a bunch of interviews from those conversations and then ideally convert at least to some of them. Now, will it be the top echelons of Wall Street and at the most prestigious firms? Maybe not. But if you can get that half step done, whether it's TAS, whether it's deal advisory or a valuation shop, or even asset management, and you're trying to get to sales and trading eventually, and you're working middle office and you're networking internally and across bulge brackets, for example. Like I've seen it happen so many times. I've seen so many career changers, people in accounting or audit move to banking. I've seen, where people are like, oh, you can't do that. You can't come from audit. I'm like, I've seen it all the time. Like, and sometimes it takes a little half step in between to get there. But if like you have that ultimate end goal, you absolutely can get yourself closer with little mini half steps. It doesn't have to be all one big jump. If you're really kind of zooming out and taking that multi-year approach, it tends to be much healthier and much more realistic, because you're not trying to make it all the gains in one fell swoop. So someone said on IG, I actually applied for the academy, didn't get a reply from the academy. I would email admissions@wallstreetoasis.com. We'll look into it and see where your app is. I want to blank democratize private equity and venture capital. Give me ideas, bro. Okay. Don't know how to respond. Oh, here's a good one. I'm depressed with my job at JP Morgan. Save me. Is this front office? If it's front office and you're an analyst, I would say start pushing back. Start pushing back to your staffer. If it's like they're overworking you and you're depressed because you're getting grinded into the ground, just push back. Don't quit. I much rather you push back and have to get severance because they want to get rid of you than you just outright quit. So think of it that way, as like the worst thing you can do is just leave, especially before 1 year. So if it's in your first year, please make it through the first year. I had a lot of pain, not depression, but tons of anxiety in my first year at Rothschild. Long hours, 90+ hour weeks. I was a liberal arts major, having to learn all this finance stuff all at once, getting thrown under the bus by associates. It was bad. So just know that like you're not alone in your struggles there. So just try to keep your head down if it is front office. If it's middle office or back office, try to carve out time of your week and just kind of keep your vision on the longer term in terms of where you want to go eventually, and try to be really, really diligent with your calendar and with your time, because time is like obviously the most precious resource. You want to make sure you're carving it out and either being productive or like actively recovering. And so that means sleep, that means exercise, that means rest, or that means, a little bit of, actually downtime. And so if you are getting grinded on at the analyst level, just please don't quit in that first year unless you think you really have like serious mental health risks or like physical risks. But if that's the case, I would ask you to push back. I would ask you to say, ask for time off, or don't take on any more staffing. Just say, I can't physically do it. I had to do that at one point as well, where I had been working, 90+ hour weeks, and I was really kind of getting burnt out. And so it's totally normal to push back there. So don't feel like you can't do that. Is what I mean. So, okay. New question from Jude. Can I get into banking without a degree, but A minus for A levels? This is more unlikely. Typically, I assume this is for UK. You're going to need a degree, a bachelor's. Now you don't have to get the master's is pretty common in the UK right after undergrad. You don't have to get the master's necessarily, but usually the bachelor's is required for most banks. You may be able to find a boiler room type place, but I don't think you necessarily want to work there. That will, take advantage of you. So, yeah. Okay, we got an interesting question here. Contact with the VP at JP Morgan, grown very close, communicate on WhatsApp quite often. What do you suggest? Ask him if he can link me to their colleagues, if at all, I should do. And when should I push for a referral? Pernille, great question. So I think a lot of people struggle with this in particular. And so depending on what he's told you, if he's told you like, hey, you know what, you should go do these things to improve yourself, or if it's more like friendly, you kind of want to do different things. If he's giving you suggestions on how to improve yourself, I would go do those things and then come back to him once those are done. It also depends on your timing. So like, I don't think you should outright push for a referral, being like, hey, can you give me a referral? Unless you've had you're doing that on a phone call and you kind of frame it as more of a, hey, is there anyone else at XYZ group that you know that you could potentially put me in touch with? I've spoken with A, B, and C in these groups, and it was really informative. And so if you can have a more specific ask instead of, hey, can you give me a referral for a job? It tends to go over better, number one. And number two, I would say that how casual the relationship gets, like you don't want to necessarily, just because he or she is casual, doesn't necessarily you want to be pinging them all the time or make it overly casual on your end, because you still want them to feel strongly enough, like if they were to refer you, you're gonna present a very professional, polished, version of yourself. So just be careful not getting lulled into like false complacency around like what they expect in terms of like professional demeanor. And then I would say you can ask for other referrals, but I'd prefer to do it on like a call, like a catch-up call. And I prefer to do, especially if you're close to them, and do it in that sense. And then ideally that would be a good time also to like let them know that you have applied somewhere in the firm, so they know. And ideally, if they like you enough, they should be like, oh, well, let me put in a word to try and make sure you get that first round. And that's why networking is so powerful. Ideally, you're having those good you're developing those good connections, and so that way, when the time comes, they want to help you out. So here we go. Some good questions, some tough questions. Considering getting an MBA from New York Institute of Tech. Well, first, I wouldn't get an MBA from New York Institute of Tech if your goal is to get IB internships. So just be very careful, guys. Like an MBA, like I don't care if it's paid for, like it's just, there's opportunity cost of your time, not just this tuition. Like if your goal is to get IB internships, you can do this without an MBA from a complete non-target. Like it actually can brand you and hurt you if you're going to like a complete non-target. So like it can actively hurt you. You're just basically saying like, look, I couldn't get into a better MBA program, blah, blah, blah. And so I'm doing this MBA because I couldn't figure out what else to do. I actually prefer in this case, rather than an MBA that's outside the top 20, I'd rather you go to like an MSF that's in the top 5. In a case like this, MSFs are pretty expensive, but they tend to be 1 year. If you know what you want, you can kind of be networking leading up into the MSF. You can't go into the MSF and then start working. You got to be networking leading into it. But like a Vandy, Princeton, MIT, or a few others have good programs and have placed decently well, assuming you don't need a visa. Be careful for those international students that are in the US trying to get placed out of non-target MSFs. That is our toughest, by far, that is our toughest group to help. And they're the most, and they tend to be some of the hardest working students that we have, but they are the hardest to place for sure. And the outcomes aren't as good as the rest of our students, but the MSF can be great if you're don't need the visa, want to reset, and don't want to do the full 2-year MBA. Just be careful. You can't go to as deep. Like, whereas the MBA, I'd say, hey, it's good for a reset for people, even if you're at like 15th or 17th ranked MBA, which I think is like a Yale or Cornell or USC or something like that. Even that has a lot of value versus like the MSF. I would try to stick into like the top 5 to 7. I wouldn't really go too much further below that because it starts dropping off. That placements start dropping off pretty fast from there. Sorry, go ahead, Amir.
Yeah, there's a question that supplements the answer you just gave. Someone said, would masters or undergrad be better from a T20?
It kind of, I mean, for trying to get an analyst role, you want an undergrad to be more higher ranked. Masters, if you're like saying in the UK, I would say probably the masters is more important because it's the latest branding. And if you have access to that alumni group, it's going to be still going to be valuable. So yeah, I'd say depending if UK, I know masters is stacked after undergrad. US, I would say it's probably better If you're trying to go get a role right out of undergrad, you want the T20 from the undergrad first because that's your first shot. So it just kind of depends where you are in your journey. Willie asks good questions. My school does not have a business school, only offers econ. Would you recommend double majoring in or mining in data statistical science? Hey, Willie. So I went to Williams College, same thing. I was an econ major. I would not recommend majoring in data statistical science unless, number one, you're really good at it and you're going to keep your GPA really high. That's the only thing, meaning like you're good at it, it's relatively easy for you, and it's not going to put your GPA at risk. So, if you enjoy it and it's not going to like stress you out because it's a much more difficult major, then yeah, I think it can look good. I don't think it moves the needle that much, except maybe it would make potential employers, respect it would remove any question on your comfort around numbers and stuff. So I think it could on the margin slightly help, but it's not that much. GPA is going to matter more. School is going to matter more, and timing is going to matter more, and your connections into the industry are going to matter. So think of it in that order. Let's see. How much time do I have? It's 11:52. I think I have a call. Make sure. Sorry, guys, just pulling up my calendar. Yeah, I got a call in I got 8 minutes, so I'll spend 8 minutes here. I work for many KPO firms. I mean, with clients. Yeah, I don't even know. I work for many KPO firms as an IB analyst with clients TB Lazard. You almost spelled Lazard like lizard. I would have given you more bonus points. Mizuho want to switch to front. I think this is saying, okay. I don't really understand what this is asking or what the question is. I have a bachelor's in finance and to get into quant finance. Yes, so quant finance is tricky because it's a pretty umbrella term. There's quant researchers, there's quant traders, there's lots of different angles to it. In terms of how to get ready, you definitely want to have more in terms of interview prep. You definitely want to make sure that your mental math is polished, and you have a lot more your brain teasers are polished because they tend to do a little bit more on that, and then more macro. You need to know more macro. For example, if you're interviewing with a quant hedge fund, you need to be able to understand the Fed and policies and what's going on there. But the tips to get in, it's going to be similar. You want to be networking with people in quant finance to understand it so that you can get invited to those first rounds. And this is assuming it's entry level. So Percy asks, is it too late for high finance as a rising junior right now? Any options to go for? No, it's not too late. Definitely the window the path to high finance has become much harder at this point as a rising junior, because it sounds like you're aware of, most of on-cycle or all of on-cycle is basically done. It doesn't mean that there isn't another potential window that would open up kind of going into senior year. So that late July, August framework or window where there's potentially a full-time hiring process for full-time roles for people who either didn't or lateraling up, trying to get from smaller banks to bigger banks, but also people who didn't have an internship and switched majors late or something like that. There is a process that happens kind of from junior to senior year. And so sometimes there is a process, sometimes there not. Sometimes there is, if deal volume is exploding, then they realize they underhired for their intern class. If the economy's in the dumps and deal volume is way low, then vice versa is true. Typically, even the return offers suffer in that case. So it's not too late. What I would try to point out to Percy is there are a lot, if you don't need a visa and you're in the US, or even if you're in the UK, or Europe, there's a lot of smaller shops out there. There's a really long tail of firms out there where you can still get finance experience, and your deals may be much smaller. But if you can get sell side or buy side experience at a firm, even if it's a no name shop or boutique, it's better than going to work back office at Goldman. in my opinion, in terms of your long-term career trajectory. Because if you get really good at networking, you get deal experience on your CV, and you talk a good game, like you're able to talk, actually do the modeling, you're able to talk about all the things you did. You're developing like a really valuable skill set that when the economy does pick up and banks are suddenly looking for laterals because they lost 3 extra analysts they didn't expect to lose. If you're in that conversation, you've made those connections, and suddenly you could actually like have a major jump in terms of lateral hires. And I see this happen all the time. So that's why deal advisory is really good to as a waiting period, a place to kind of wait it out in terms of your opportunity to jump. And I've seen people even at other big fours kind of struggle to get into TAS or deal advisory. Everyone wants to go to deal advisory for this reason. And I've seen people like struggle to do that internally. So it's still very competitive to get into, but it's a good place to kind of make that half step, even though you're late. So keep that in mind. Let's see what else we got here. How is Babson MSF? Do you have anyone from there? I'd have to look at our student roster. I'm not sure. I know we have some Babson students. I'm not sure if we have somebody from the MSF program. I think we might have one or two that have come through the MSF there. Yeah, no worries, Percy. Yeah, I think we have a few, maybe 1 or 2 students from MSF. I know we have definitely some Babson undergrads. This is how likely is someone to get interviews without referrals in equity research, asset management, and IB? This is great. This is great. So how likely is someone? So you want to like me to risk adjust or give you odds. So let's just start with equity research, asset management. Let's say there's a student. So first off, equity research, asset management, different from IB, because those, if the student or the candidate had like CFA or CFA level 1 completed, that's going to increase their likelihood of getting an off or getting an interview in equity research or asset management. But I'd still say for each online application they submit, the odds are still tend to be, for the average student at, let's say, a semi-target, mediocre, good GPA, like 3.6, 3.7, CFA level 1, equity research, asset management, the odds of them getting an interview are probably in the 2% range, 2 to 5% range. If it's not on-campus recruiting, if it's just a pure application drop. If they have the CFA, maybe it goes up a little bit to like 5 to 7. For IB, if they've done no referrals and nothing, and you're talking on cycle for that same student, it's really under 1%. So you could be dropping like 500 applications and you maybe get like 2 interviews out of it. So it's really bad for IB if you don't do the referrals and the networking, at least in the US. In the UK, it's a little bit more streamlined where they're giving you SHL tests, higher views. In the US, they do this too, but you can kind of come through the side door a little bit more easily. And so the UK folks are like, oh, so I don't have to network, right? I don't have to network. It's actually, no, it's not true at all. Networking is still incredibly valued in UK and Europe, and all throughout APAC, actually, because basically when you get to that final round interview, if you've spoken with, say, half the people doing your assessment center, it's still incredibly valuable. Knowing what's coming, having built those relationships, you can imagine who's going to get the offer at the end of the day. So, yeah, any tips on cold emailing bankers? Mikey from IG is asking. Yeah, keep it short, keep it relevant, and try to make sure you follow up. And so you don't just send out an email and then just give up. So if you're just sending one and done, your odds of actually getting them to respond is incredibly low. Cold email is just very, very low hit rate unless it's an alum and unless you have an impressive background, and you can kind of speak to their specific background. So that's why cold email is tough, because like to scale it is harder. It's actually much easier to use LinkedIn to qualify the leads and know who's much more likely to get on a call. So let me repeat that. It's much more likely to use LinkedIn to qualify your leads to see who's more likely to get on a call versus cold email. You're just spraying and praying. I have seen a cold email approaches work where you're doing kind of a little bit more nuanced, targeted approaches, but this is really for more career changers, laterals who have a specific niche expertise, and they know their group of targeted people they want to hit up is like 100 people, not 10,000 people. For that specific use case, cold email can be useful. because they're going to spend a little bit more time on each email to make sure it's crafted to that person. And it's still going to have to be short, but it's going to be a little bit more personalized. Like, hey, I noticed you work at this specific group and you did this in your career. It was really interesting. I'd love to connect. I've worked for 5 years here and here and here. So like, but if you're an undergrad, really like the idea of having a much wider top of funnel and leveraging LinkedIn and LinkedIn automation tools and stuff like that. If you are interested in joining us for our program, definitely check us out at wallstreetwso.com/academy. You can see it on the screen here. The June cohort is full, but we do have some spots available for July. It's June 3rd right now. July 7th is the next cohort. So yeah, get your applications in. We'll get you on a call for an interview with the admissions team. And yeah, wish you all the best of luck and thanks for joining.